The year was 1867, and the high plains of Wyoming carried the kind of silence that pressed heavy on a man's chest. Dust rose in red plumes when the wind blew, and on the far edge of the valley stood a ranch that looked more like a fortress than a home. Its fences were tall, its windows shuttered even in daylight, and its master was a man the town of Rawlings called Heartless. Elias McKenna rode his land like a ghost, broad-shouldered, grim-faced, hat pulled low. Folks whispered he'd once been different, back before cholera had taken his wife and the unborn child she carried. They said he buried them with his own hands, then built his ranch walls high so nothing could touch him again. He spoke little. He drank less, and though he was feared for his quick draw and his temper, no man could deny his honesty. He paid in full, fought only when cornered, and kept his ranch running alone. That morning, Elias saddled his bay gelding and rode toward town. The sky was pale, the air raw with the scent of rain. His rifle rested in the scabbard, a revolver heavy on his hip. He rode not for company but for supplies, salt pork, flour, lead shot. Nothing more. The town of Rawlings stirred with its usual unrest. Wagons rattled past the saloon. Cowboys argued over poker on the boardwalk. Elias dismounted, tied his horse outside the mercantile, and stepped inside. The place smelled of coffee grounds and oiled wood. He lifted his hat in the barest nod to the shopkeeper, then moved toward the barrels of beans without a word. That was when the door burst open. Two men stormed in, pistols out, faces hidden behind kerchiefs. The first fired a shot into the ceiling. "Nobody move," he barked, his voice rough as gravel. A woman screamed. Elias froze where he stood, hand near his hip, but not yet touching his colt. The second outlaw shoved a man aside and yanked open the till. Coin spilled. Shouts filled the air. Elias's jaw tightened. He had no interest in dying for fools who didn't know when to stay low. But then came the sharp crack of a gun misfiring, the confusion of bodies scrambling. A bullet flew wild. It struck a man by the doorway, pierced his chest. His wife, clutching two small children, screamed his name. Another shot rang out, and she fell too, blood blooming across her calico dress. The children, one boy of perhaps 10, one girl no older than 6, were left standing in the dust and terror. Their eyes were wide, their mouths open in soundless cries. Something inside Elias broke. His colt was in his hand before he thought of it. The first outlaw spun toward him, gun raised. Elias fired once, clean through the man's chest. The second swung his pistol wildly, but Elias's bullet shattered his wrist. The weapon clattered to the floor, and the outlaw dropped screaming, clutching the ruin of his hand. Smoke curled thick in the mercantile. Silence fell, but for the children's sobs. Elias stood motionless, revolver lowered, eyes hard. He had not moved to comfort them. He had not said a word. The shopkeeper muttered a prayer. The sheriff burst in moments later, puffing and red-faced. He saw the bodies, saw Elias, saw the children clutching their dead mother's skirts. "Hell," he breathed. The boy's face turned toward Elias. There was anger in those eyes, raw, burning anger that had no place in a child. The girl clung to her brother's arm, shaking with silent sobs. Elias met their gaze for only a moment before he turned, holstered his pistol, and walked out into the sun. He did not wait for thanks. He did not offer comfort. He mounted his horse, spurred lightly, and rode back toward his ranch. But Rawlings was a small town, and word traveled fast. Before the sun dipped, the sheriff himself rode to the McKenna ranch. Elias met him at the gate, arms folded. The children were there, perched awkwardly on the sheriff's mule, two shadows in the dying light. "Elias," the sheriff began, voice gravelly with exhaustion. "You saw what happened today. They got no kin. None. And I can't keep them. My place is the jailhouse. They'll starve before week's end." Elias's eyes hardened. "Not my concern." The sheriff dismounted, dust rising around his boots. He set the girl down first. She wobbled, then steadied herself, still clutching her brother's hand. "Look at em," the sheriff pressed. "Town won't take em. You got land. You got room. You're all that's left. They'll find someone, Elias said flatly. The sheriff's jaw worked. They'll find the orphan train, maybe, or the streets. You know what happens to kids left alone out here. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Damn it, Elias, I got no choice but to leave them with you. At least until we figure it out. Elias stared at the children. The boy glared back, jaw clenched, daring him to refuse. The girl's eyes shimmered with tears. He felt a knot tighten in his chest, the same knot that had bound him since the day he buried his wife. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the house. The sheriff exhaled, guided the children forward, and left them on the porch. So began their life with the Heartless rancher. The first evening was cold and tense. Elias cooked beans over the stove, served them in silence. The boy shoved the tin plate away. I ain't hungry. Elias's eyes narrowed. Then you'll go hungry. He didn't press. The girl, timid, ate quietly, sneaking glances at him between bites. That night, as coyotes yipped beyond the fences, Elias sat in his chair staring into the fire. He heard soft footsteps. The girl appeared in the doorway, blanket clutched around her shoulders. I'm scared, she whispered. Elias frowned. Your room's warm enough. She bit her lip, eyes wide. For a long moment, he considered sending her back. Instead, he nodded toward the corner. She curled on the rug near the fire's glow, and soon her breathing slowed. The boy remained distant, hard-eyed, refusing even the simplest kindness. Elias understood that anger. He'd carried it once, and it had burned him hollow. Days passed uneasy and sharp. Elias put the children to chores, fetching water, mending small things, feeding chickens. The boy obeyed stiffly, never with thanks. The girl followed Elias like a shadow, asking questions he never answered. But cracks had begun to form in his walls, though he refused to see them. It was on the fifth night that he noticed the glow on the ridge, orange, flickering. He rose fast, rifle in hand, eyes narrowing at the line of torches moving through the dark. Raiders, likely kin of the outlaws, he'd gunned down. They hadn't forgotten. He glanced toward the children, asleep in the corner. For years, Elias McKenna had guarded nothing but his own solitude. Now, with the glow of fire on the horizon, he felt the old weight of responsibility settling back on his shoulders. He slid shells into his rifle, every motion steady. The night air carried the smell of smoke. Coyotes fell silent. His heartbeat was a drum in his chest. He muttered under his breath, voice low, almost foreign to his own ears. Damn it all, I ain't heartless. The torches drew closer. For the first time in years, Elias McKenna had something to lose. And the enemy was coming fast. The night split open with gunfire. Elias was on the porch when the first shot cracked across the fields. He fired back without thought, the muzzle flash lighting the lines in his weathered face. Horses shrieked in the corral. The girl screamed inside the house, the boy dragging her toward the hearth. More shots tore into the dark, shouts, curses, the howl of raiders drunk on revenge. The barn caught fire before Elias even saw the man who threw the torch. Flames clawed skyward, orange against the black. Elias's chest tightened. That barn had taken him years to raise, every beam cut and hammered by his own hands. But the livestock inside shrieked louder than the burning timbers, and there was no time for mourning. He dropped two men with quick, merciless shots, then kicked the door open and dragged horses into the yard, smoke burning his eyes. The boy appeared at the doorway, a shotgun clutched too big for his thin arms. Elias barked, "Stay inside," but the boy stood stubborn. One raider charged from a flank. Elias pivoted, rifle raised, but the boy fired first. The recoil threw him back, the shot tearing dirt at the outlaw's feet. It wasn't enough to kill, but it was enough to save Elias a heartbeat. His bullet finished the job. When the last raider fled into the hills, Elias stood breathing hard, smoke thick around him, sweat dripping down his temples. The barn was half ash. Horses trembled, wild-eyed. The children clung to each other, shaking, faces pale. The girl whispered, "Don't let him come back." Elias's chest ached in a way no bullet ever caused. He knelt before them, eyes level with the boy. Get your sister ready. We can't stay here." By dawn, they were gone. Elias packed what little they could carry: rifle, pistol, a sack of flour, salted pork, matches, water skins. He saddled his gelding, placed the girl in front of him, and set the boy behind. They rode east into wilderness, leaving the ranch smoldering behind them. The land was cruel. Wide stretches of sagebrush rolled beneath a pitiless sun. Coyotes shadowed them. Storm clouds stacked like mountains to the north. Elias knew every mile they rode could carry danger. The raiders weren't done. Men who lost brothers and cousins carried grudges deeper than rivers. On the second day, they reached a river swollen with spring melt. The current snarled white and fast. Elias tied a rope around the gelding's chest, leading him in, water biting cold against his thighs. The girl clung tight, eyes shut. Midway, the boy lost his hold, slipped into the current, flailing. Elias let out a curse sharp as thunder. He dove, rope straining, water dragging him under. His hand caught cloth, thin wrist beneath it. He hauled the boy up, lungs burning, kicking hard until they broke the surface. The river roared around them, but the horse pulled, steady and strong, carrying them to the far bank. They collapsed on the mud, gasping. The boy coughed, chest heaving, eyes wide with the first flicker of fear Elias had seen from him. His voice cracked. "Don't let me drown. Don't leave us." Elias pressed a rough hand to the boy's shoulder. "I won't." The word surprised even him. They camped that night in a hollow of cottonwoods. Elias started a fire, skin raw from rope burn. He showed the boy how to spear fish in the shallows, guided the girl's small hands as she salted the catch. He watched them eat, their faces smudged with soot and river mud, and felt something heavy shifting in his chest. But danger didn't sleep. On the fourth night, wolves circled the camp. Eyes glowed red in the dark, low growls rumbling from the brush. Elias rose slow, rifle in hand. One lunged. The shot cracked, firelight flashing teeth. Another leapt from the side. Elias swung the barrel, fired again, but claws raked his arm deep before the wolf fell dead. Blood soaked his sleeve, hot and slick. The children shrieked. The boy grabbed a burning branch, swinging wild. The wolves snarled, but the fire drove them back. One by one they melted into the night, leaving silence and smoke. Elias sank to his knees, blood dripping from his arm. The girl's tiny hands pressed at the wound, voice trembling. "Don't die. Please don't die." The boy crouched beside him, jaw clenched, eyes bright with something more than fear. "You're all we got," he said, voice low, steady. Elias stared at him. No one had said such words to him in years. He'd thought himself alone, meant to stay that way until the grave. Yet here were two children who looked at him as though his life held weight again. He bandaged his arm, pain grinding his teeth, but he stayed awake long after they slept. The stars wheeled above, cold and sharp. He thought of his wife, the grave on the hill, the emptiness that had defined him. For the first time, that emptiness felt less like protection, more like a wound left open too long. The days blurred into hardship. They walked when the horse grew weak. They ate little. The boy stopped complaining, shoulders squaring under the weight of chores Elias handed him. The girl laughed, sometimes soft as bells, when Elias taught her how to whistle through a blade of grass. The sound startled him. It had been years since laughter filled his world. One night, as fire cracked low, Elias spoke of the past. His voice was gravel, his words halting. "My wife's name was Mary. She carried our child. Fever took em both. I buried em myself." His gaze fixed on the flames. "That's why I built my walls high, to keep from feeling it again." The girl leaned against him, eyes heavy with sleep. The boy stared into the fire, quiet for once. Elias thought the silence would stretch, but then the boy murmured, "Maybe walls don't stop pain. Maybe they just keep out the good, too." Elias swallowed hard. He had no answer. By the time the sheriff found them, Elias's arm was healing, though stiff. The lawman rode in at dusk, horse lathered, hat low. He dismounted, face grim. "They're comin', Elias." Raiders regrouped. "Bigger band this time. You can't keep running. You'll wear those kids to the bone." Elias's jaw tightened. "What's your plan? Leave us to hang?" "I'm warning you," the sheriff said. "You stand or you fall. But they're coming for you." His eyes flicked to the children. And for them. The boy stepped closer to Elias, defiant. The girl clutched his coat. Elias met the sheriff's gaze, the old steel back in his eyes. "Then we don't run anymore. We make our stand." The sheriff shook his head, muttered a prayer, and rode off into the gathering dark. Elias turned to the children. Their faces were pale but set, like fledgling hawks bracing for flight. He knelt, laying a hand on each of their shoulders. "This is our fight now. You hear me? Not just mine. Ours." The boy nodded once, jaw hard. The girl's lip trembled, but she held his gaze. That night, Elias stared long into the fire. He'd been called Heartless, a man of stone. Yet here, with two orphans pressed close for warmth, he felt something stirring fierce and unbreakable. Not the ache of grief, not the cold of solitude, but the heat of purpose. The raiders were coming, and this time Elias McKenna would not face them as a man alone. Dawn came sharp and cold, the kind of morning when the prairie felt brittle, ready to snap. Elias stood outside the half-burned ranch house, eyes on the horizon where the hills curved like broken teeth. The land was too still. No bird call, no wind through sage. He knew they would come today. The boy and girl worked beside him, silent but determined. Elias had set them to carrying water, stacking kindling, and hauling cartridges. He'd shown the boy how to oil a rifle, the girl how to keep the lanterns filled. Their small hands fumbled, but they did not complain. There was steel in them now, shaped by fire and fear. Elias hammered boards across broken windows. His wounded arm throbbed, but he kept working. The children watched him without question, eyes bright with the trust he never asked for yet carried heavy as iron. He thought of Mary, her smile in the morning light, the way she once pressed his hand to her belly where life had stirred. He'd lost that future, and for years he believed the world had taken all it could. But here were two children, alive, breathing, looking to him as though he was all that stood between them and the grave. By mid-morning, the wind shifted. The smell of horses carried with it the faint reek of sweat and gunpowder. Elias lifted his rifle, peered down the valley. Dust rose in a thin column. Then he saw them. Riders, a dozen at least, black shapes cutting across the plain. His jaw clenched. He turned to the boy. "Stay close. Remember what I showed you. You keep your sister behind cover, you hear?" The boy nodded, too proud to speak. The girl's lip trembled, but she held his coat tight. Elias moved to the gate, rifle braced. The riders fanned out, circling, their leader at the front with a red scarf whipping in the wind. He shouted something, a taunt carried faint on the breeze. Elias spat in the dirt, raised his rifle, and fired. The lead rider reeled back, tumbling from the saddle. The fight began. Gunfire ripped through the morning, echoing off the hills. Bullets tore splinters from the fences, thudded into walls. Elias fired with precision, each shot measured deadly. A raider tumbled from his horse, another screamed as lead tore through his leg. But they were many, and Elias was one. The boy crouched near the house, rifle clutched awkward but steady. When a raider tried to flank, the boy pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, but close enough to drive the man back. His small shoulders shook, but he reloaded just as Elias had shown him. The girl, too small to fight, darted between rooms, fetching water, carrying cartridges with quick, trembling hands. Once, when a raider climbed the fence, she grabbed the old dinner bell rope and rang it hard, the clang so sudden and loud that the outlaw flinched. Elias took that heartbeat to put a bullet through his chest. Smoke drifted across the yard, acrid and thick. Horses screamed. Raiders shouted curses, circling tighter. Elias felt the weight of every breath. His wounded arms slowed him, blood seeping fresh, but he forced himself to keep steady. He had fought before, border skirmishes, brawls in saloons, but never with two small lives pressed behind him like fragile glass. A raider's shot grazed his ribs, hot pain lancing through. He staggered, fell against a fence, teeth gritted. The boy cried out, but did not leave cover. Elias raised his revolver, fired point-blank into the face of the man rushing him. Blood sprayed across the dirt. Elias swayed but did not fall. Then the leader came. He was tall, scarred, eyes mean as a rattler's. He dismounted slow, walking with a calm that chilled the air. Gun smoke drifted around him as though it belonged there. He called out, voice deep mocking, "McKenna, you think you can kill my kin and walk away? I'll take your ranch. I'll take those brats you're hiding, and I'll hang your hide on the barn door." Elias stood straight, rifle empty, revolver near spent. He dropped the rifle, drew the Colt. His voice was iron. "You'll take nothing." The leader smiled, drew his pistol. The two men faced each other across the churned dirt. Silence fell, just wind and the sharp breath of children watching from cover. Elias's arm shook, blood dripping down his sleeve. He thought of Mary. He thought of the boy's defiant stare, the girl's trembling hand in his. He thought of what it meant to be heartless, and how he was not that man anymore. The guns fired almost as one. Elias felt fire streak his side, spinning him back, but his shot landed true. The leader staggered, disbelief flashing across his face before he crumpled to the ground. For a moment, the raiders froze, their will broken. Then they turned, scattered like crows into the hills. The fight was over. Elias dropped to one knee, blood soaking his shirt. His Colt slipped from his hand, clattering on the dirt. The boy ran to him, eyes wide, voice breaking. "Don't die!" The girl clung to his arm, tears streaking her cheeks. Elias drew a shuddering breath, forced a hand to their shoulders. "You're safe," he rasped. "That's what matters." They held him, small bodies pressed to his side, and for the first time since Mary's death, Elias felt something fill the hollow inside him. Not pain, not loss, but belonging. The sheriff and townsfolk rode in an hour later, rifles ready, but they found only smoke, bodies, and Elias standing bloodied but unbroken, two children at his side. The sheriff stared, eyes wide. "By God, you held him off?" Elias said nothing, just rested a hand on the boy's shoulder, the girl clutching his coat. The sheriff shook his head, a crooked smile breaking through. "Maybe you ain't so heartless after all." Word spread fast. Rawlings no longer whispered of Elias McKenna as a man of stone, but as the rancher who stood against a dozen killers to protect two orphans. Some offered to take the children, but Elias refused. His voice was low, certain. "They're mine now." The weeks that followed were not easy. The ranch had to be rebuilt, the barn raised again from ash. Elias's wounds healed slow, leaving new scars across old ones. But the children worked beside him. The boy grew stronger, hands calloused, jaw set like Elias's own. The girl laughed more often, her small songs rising above the hammering of nails. Nights by the fire became different, less hollow, filled with warmth that Elias never thought he'd feel again. He no longer sat alone. He no longer built walls higher than a man's heart could reach. Some nights, when coyotes sang, Elias looked at the children and saw a future he thought long buried, a chance to be more than a ghost. He'd lost one family, but fate, cruel as it was, had seen fit to give him another. Years later, the town still spoke of that day. They told of the rancher, once called Heartless, who bled and fought to keep two orphans safe. They told how those children grew strong under his hand, how they bore his name, though no blood bound them. And when the story was told by lamplight with young ones listening wide-eyed, the end was always the same. "They called him Heartless once," the teller would say, "but those children melted his walls, and in the end they called him Father." So, what do we take from such a tale? Maybe this, that the frontier tested more than a man's skill with a gun. It tested his will to love again after loss, to open doors when grief told him to bar them shut. Elias McKenna proved that even the coldest heart could burn again when life demanded it. If this story stirred something in you, share it. Remember it, because out here, family wasn't always born. Sometimes it was forged in fire and blood and held together by a man who finally found his purpose when two orphans needed him most. The prairie had a way of testing a man twice, first to break him, then to see if he'd learned. Elias McKenna thought the fight was over. The raiders were scattered, the ranch still standing, and the children under his roof. But peace on the frontier was never more than a pause between storms. Summer baked the land hard, every blade of grass brittle as tinder. Elias worked dawn to dusk, rebuilding what fire had taken. The boy, Caleb, carried lumber with jaw clenched like a man twice his age. The girl, Annie, followed close, bringing nails, fetching water, singing under her breath when she thought no one listened. To town folk, they were still orphans. To Elias, they were his. He'd said it plain enough. But deep inside, a question gnawed him raw. Was he a father now, or just a man playing at it until fate stole him too? One evening, as the sky bled red, Elias heard hoofbeats beyond the ridge. His hand went to his Colt. Caleb stepped beside him, too quick, rifle clutched. "Stay back," Elias muttered, but the boy squared his shoulders, refusing. That stubbornness, Elias realized, was carved from his own bones. A rider crested the hill, not a raider but a courier. Dust streaked his coat, a telegram clutched in his fist. "Message for McKenna," he called, voice sharp. Elias broke the seal, eyes narrowing at the words. Band of survivors regrouping south of Platte River. Leader's kin swore vengeance. Coming north. Be warned. The paper crumpled in his fist. He felt the ache of old scars, the pull of wounds barely healed. He had bled for these children once. Could he do it again and live through it? That night, Elias sat long by the fire. Caleb cleaned his rifle, hands steady now, movements practiced. Annie mended torn cloth, her small brow furrowed in concentration. The glow of lamplight made them look older, harder. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. He dragged them into a war not of their making. He spoke low, gravel in his throat. "They're coming again. More of 'em. Worse than before." Caleb's eyes lit, not with fear, but fire. "Then we fight." Elias slammed a palm on the table. "You're a boy, not a soldier." "I'm what you taught me to be," Caleb shot back. His voice cracked, but the steel was there. Annie's small hand slid over his, quiet but firm. "We're not leaving you." Elias stared at them, heart tight. Mary's voice whispered from memory, "Don't shut yourself away, Eli. One day, someone will need you to stay open." He thought he'd buried that plea with her, but now it rose, demanding an answer. The next days blurred with preparation. Elias showed Caleb how to lay snares, how to sight, a rifle steady even with shaking hands. Annie, too small to fight, learned to signal with mirrors from the ridge, to carry water fast, to keep powder dry. Every hour tightened the bond between them. Every hour deepened Elias's dread. At dusk on the fourth day, the horizon filled with riders. Dust rose like smoke from a burning world. 20, maybe more, faces hard, guns glinting in the last light. The kin of the man Elias had killed. Elias drew a slow breath. Inside. Stay low. But Caleb stood his ground, rifle ready. Annie's chin lifted, eyes wide but unyielding. Elias felt pride and terror twist inside him. He'd wanted to keep them safe. Instead, he'd forged them into fighters. The first shot cracked, echoing across the valley. Wood splintered. Annie screamed, but Elias pulled her behind cover. Bullets chewed through fence posts, hissed past ears. Elias fired back, every shot careful measured. Men fell, horses reared. But numbers pressed heavy, and the ranch groaned under the weight of assault. The boy fired too, his shot grazing a rider's shoulder. He worked the lever fast, no hesitation now. Elias barked, "Good, keep low." His chest swelled with something fierce. The boy was no longer just surviving, he was standing beside him, his equal in courage, if not in years. The fight stretched bloody and endless. Windows shattered. The barn roof caught fire again. Elias's arm bled fresh where a bullet carved flesh. His vision swam, but still he held fast. Then the leader rode forward. Tall, broad, eyes blazing with hatred. He carried not a pistol but a shotgun, and his voice rolled like thunder. "McKenna, you'll die slow, and the brat's with you." Elias staggered to his feet, Colt heavy in his hand. "Not while I'm breathing." The leader spurred his horse, charging. Caleb screamed. Firing wildly, shots sparking off the saddle. Annie rang the dinner bell again. its clang splitting the air, distracting the rider for a blink. That blink was enough. Elias fired once, twice. The leader jerked, blood spraying. He toppled from his horse, body thudding hard in the dust. The raiders faltered, their will cracked like dry wood. They turned, cursing, retreating into the hills. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of flame on barnwood. Elias dropped to one knee, Colt slipping from them fingers. His vision blurred. Caleb ran to him, catching his shoulder. "Pa!" The word tore raw from his throat, unplanned, unpracticed, but true. Elias froze, heart hammering. Annie clung to his side, tears streaking her face. "Don't leave us, Pa?" For a moment, the weight of years pressed down. Mary's grave, the long silence, the walls he built high. And then, like floodwater, something broke free inside him. He pulled the children close, voice ragged. "I ain't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever." The sheriff arrived by dawn, townsfolk trailing with rifles and buckets. They found the ranch scarred, blood on the dirt, but Elias standing with two children at his side. The sheriff shook his head slow, awe in his eyes. "By God, you did it again." Elias said nothing, only rested a hand on Caleb's shoulder, Annie's small fingers twined in his. His silence was not heartless now. It was full, heavy with meaning. Weeks passed. The ranch rose anew, stronger this time. Caleb worked as though born to it. Every beam he lifted proof of grit. Annie's laughter filled the house, a sound Elias carried like treasure. Nights by the fire were no longer hollow. They were warm, alive. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the prairie, Elias sat with them on the porch. Caleb leaned against his side, rifle across his lap. Annie curled with her head on his arm. Elias looked out across the land, his land, their land. For the first time in years, the horizon did not feel empty. He thought of the names he'd been given: rancher, fighter, heartless. None fit anymore. One name did: father. The frontier would test them again, he knew. Hard times never ended. But Elias McKenna was no longer a man alone. He had two children who bore his strength, his fire, his heart. And together, they would weather whatever storm came. So, the tale of the heartless rancher ended not in stone, but in fire that forged a family.